For over a century, the story felt settled. Man the hunter. Woman the gatherer. He fought the mammoth. She stayed home with the fire. And the children. It was clean, it was simple, and it was treated as the natural order. Proof that male dominance wasn't invented by any culture. It was written into us before we were even human. But that story has a problem. It was never actually tested. It was assumed. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists looked at a stone spear point, buried next to a skeleton, and made a snap judgment, male. A cave painting of a hunt, credited to a man's hand. No questions asked. The bias wasn't hidden. It was the framework. Then, in 2018, archaeologists in the Andes Mountains dug up a 9,000-year-old burial. Beside the skeleton, a full big-game hunting toolkit, projectile points, an animal processing kit. The skeleton belonged to a woman. So researchers went back and re-examined dozens of similar burials across the Americas. What they found was uncomfortable for the old story. Nearly half of the big-game hunters buried with hunting tools may have been female. In 2023, a much larger study pushed further. Researchers reviewed ethnographic records from dozens of foraging societies around the world. Hunter-gatherer cultures observed and documented over the last century. Their conclusion: women hunted in roughly 79% of the societies studied. And in about a third, they hunted big game specifically. The headlines wrote themselves. Man the hunter, busted. Except, and this is where you have to be careful, that finding didn't hold up cleanly. Other researchers went back through the same sources the 2023 study used, and they found real problems. Selection bias. Coding errors. Hunting counted in a way that lumped hunts occasionally together with hunts constantly. When they reanalyzed the same evidence, the pattern of men hunting more and more often didn't disappear. It's still there. What's real is that women hunting wasn't as rare or as taboo as the myth claimed. But no gendered division of labor at all also overstates the case. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere less satisfying than either headline. So if hunting alone doesn't settle it, what about status? Who actually held power? For that, archaeologists point to a place in modern-day Turkey called Çatalhöyük, 9,000 years old. At its peak, home to as many as 10,000 people. One of the largest settlements on Earth at the time. No streets. Houses packed together like a honeycomb, entered by ladder through holes in the roof. Researchers studied the skeletons buried beneath the floors of those houses. Same diets between men and women. Same soot in the lungs, meaning they spent the same amount of time indoors. Same signs of physical labor stress on the bones. Same burial treatment. No richer graves for men, no lesser ones for women. No temple. No palace. No obvious ruler's house at all. The lead archaeologist on the site called it, in his words, a place where men and women were simply equal. A 2026 genetic study went further, suggesting the community may have been matrilineal. Women stayed in the household they were born into for life, while men were the ones who moved away when they married. If that holds up, it flips almost every assumption modern viewers bring to ancient society. And the pattern here should feel familiar by now. This isn't the whole ancient world. It's one settlement. Walk a few hundred miles in almost any direction, to almost any other point in history, and the picture changes completely. In ancient Egypt, women could own property, run businesses, initiate divorce, and work as physicians. And in a handful of extraordinary cases, they didn't just influence power. They took the throne outright. Hatshepsut ruled as pharaoh in her own right for over 2 decades. Cleopatra, centuries later, ruled Egypt as its final pharaoh before Rome absorbed it. These weren't symbolic titles. They commanded armies, commissioned monuments, negotiated with foreign powers. So, Çatalhöyük says equal. Egypt says, sometimes women could rise to the very top. But the wider society around them was still built on male inheritance and male priesthoods. 2 ancient societies, 2 very different answers to the same question. Which raises the real question this video is actually about. If equality existed in some places and eras, what changed? Why does so much of later history tilt so heavily toward male control? The leading explanation researchers point to isn't biology. It's the plow. Around 6,000 years ago, in parts of the Middle East, a new farming technology spread, the ox-drawn plow. Unlike earlier hand tools used for planting, the plow required real upper body strength to operate and control. Work that, on average, favored male physiology. In societies that adopted plow agriculture, farming shifted from something everyone did to something men increasingly controlled. Women's labor moved toward processing grain and childcare, work that was just as essential, but didn't come with land, or a claim to the surplus that land produced. And that surplus mattered more than almost anything else. Once families could grow more food than they needed, someone had to control who inherited it. Landowning fathers wanted to be certain their land passed to their own children. And that motive is one of the leading theories for why so many agricultural societies built rigid rules around marriage, paternity, and female behavior. Control over land turned, gradually, into control over women. It's worth being honest here. This is a leading theory, not a settled fact. Researchers still argue over how directly the plow explains later patriarchal systems. And the transition almost certainly wasn't one clean cause. But the pattern researchers do find, again and again, is this. Societies that adopted plow-based farming show measurably wider gender gaps today than societies that farmed with hand tools instead, a gap that has persisted for thousands of years, long after most people forgot the plow had anything to do with it. So, did ancient humans believe in gender equality? Wrong question, maybe. The evidence doesn't point to one universal answer buried somewhere in prehistory, waiting to be uncovered. It points to something stranger. Gender roles weren't fixed by biology, and they weren't fixed by human nature. They moved with subsistence strategy, with technology, with how a society decided to pass down what it had built, which means the natural order that shaped so much of human history, the one people have used for centuries to justify who gets power and who doesn't, might not have been natural at all. It might have been an accident of who could push a plow the hardest, 6,000 years ago, in one part of the world. And once that accident took hold, it just kept getting passed down, mistaken, generation after generation, for the way things had always been.